Alright, this is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. Today I have another exciting episode for you, and where I'm at today is my backyard garden. But I'm just doing an intro, and I'm going to come in a brief spot to this video. So this video is not about me today, but what it is about no-till farming. So I do a method of gardening called no-till gardening, and this is actually one of my raised beds, about 4 feet wide, 16 feet long, and this does not get tilled. You know, I built these beds over the existing soil. I didn't till the ground before I put it down. You know, I put in all the soil, and then basically I've never tilled this. Of course, you know, I dig up the old roots, you know, which may not even be the best thing to do, and I top it off every season with some new soil, but I don't till it. I don't get in there with a rotor tiller. The only kind of tilling I do is I let the microbes and the earthworms do all the tilling for me. And that's what I recommend for you guys. So this is how I've incorporated no-till gardening, which is pretty easy. You know, I don't think you really need to till in a garden, especially if you're bringing in the soil, you know, and I have a really nice soil mix. This actually bed is filled with the Dr. Earth's potting soil organic mixture. It's just high quality stuff. And after every season, the soil always dips down just a little bit, maybe a ½ inch, depending on some beds. Some beds drop down to like an inch or more if I haven't, you know, topped them off. So then what I'll do is I'll just go over to the wheelbarrow. It's all the way in the back. And I'll actually mix up the, you know, maybe some more organic compost with some coconut coir, maybe some vermiculite and some rock dust, some worm castings, and some John and Bob's fertilizers, and then mix all that up. Maybe some zeolite. There's a lot of things I put in there. And mix it all up, and then just top this off with just a little bit to basically give back and put nutrition back into this garden, into this bed. Because, you know, after I had peppers in here, and I basically pulled all the peppers off and I ate them. So all the nutrition came out of the soil, came into the leaves of the plants, came into the peppers. I ate the peppers, and nutrition went into me, and then all the top growth basically got composted to go back to my composter to turn that back into soil that's going to end up going back in here. So we want to constantly, you know, feed and put nutrition back into the soil because we are constantly pulling it out. In addition, I want to encourage and remind you guys that, you know, even in this soil, even though I grew crops in here, this soil is still quite fertile because I brought in compost from the first place. I'm not just growing in the native sand here in the desert. So this is very fertile, but the problem is we need to unlock the fertility locked inside the organic matter that happens from the microbial populations, bacteria and fungi and yeasts and all the different soil microbes and the earthworms and the creatures living in the soil, the nematodes, the arthropods, I don't know, these things. They create the fertility, they break down the organic matter, create fertility that the plants could absorb. So this is how I do it in a gardening, you know, in my backyard, and that's what I encourage all you guys that are backyard gardeners to do. But what I'm going to get into next is actually a talk at the 2016 Eco Farm Conference, where I heard Paul Kaiser, who runs Singing Frog Farms, how he makes actually $100,000 a year on his organic, several acre, no-till farm. And I only recorded part of this episode because I didn't want to film the whole thing because I wanted to take notes and whatnot, and I was holding the camera with one hand. So I filmed part of this to let you guys know, you know, what he's doing. And then I'll come back at you, you know, in the halfway break to, you know, get into more of this, you know, no-till farming that Paul's doing. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and go back to the EcoFarm 2016 and the no-till farming 102 class.
Usually our CSA and farmers markets are about 50-50. And CSA is kind of going down, not in terms of, gladly, not in terms of productivity. Our productivity is the same or better. So what's happened is CSA has stayed the same size. Farmers markets have increased dramatically, and we've increased restaurant sales on top of that. So this past year, we were doing quite a bit over 300,000 in sales on about 2.5 acres of production. And that's important because one of the driving factors for us was we are in Sonoma County, and land value is very high. It's not just the mortgage on the property, it's the property taxes every year as well. And to pay that off is a real struggle and challenge. So we had to innovate. We had to innovate economically, but we also had to innovate because of what mattered to us and ecologically. As I said, our background was really in the ecological aspects of rehabilitating degraded lands. So when we started at Singing Frogs Farm, we really, our whole first year and our whole first month, we were really straight in there putting in the perennial hedgerows, putting in the tree crops, putting in all the other aspects to make a much more holistic, healthy, ecological system. And then we realized, oh, we actually have to make money at this too, so let's start the farming part of it and grow the vegetables. And as we began growing the vegetables, we said, well, let's just use the equipment the last owner left us. Let's use a disc, let's use a spader, let's use a plow, and start getting these fields ready for production. And the very act of doing all that tillage under an organic regime was completely upending all of our investment in the ecology. That tillage was just counterproductive to the ecological restoration work that we were doing. And that was the ecological side of why we became no-till. And we didn't really know that we were becoming no-till, we just knew that we wanted to farm in a way that really benefited all the perennial hedgerows, that benefited the snakes, that benefited the beneficial insects and the pollinators who were ground nesting, that benefited the water and the soil and everything else. So that's kind of how we got started and what we're doing. For those who don't know, our soil organic matter has gone from about 2.4% up to 8 or 11% or even higher. And that's over the course of the past 6 to 8 years, mostly the past 6 years of doing no-till. Our water use has gone down to about 1/10 of what it used to be for crops, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we are having dramatically more songbirds on the property, dramatically more snakes, more beneficial insects, more pollinators. So all the ecology is coming to life while we're maintaining this very high level of productivity. And I'm going to go through real fast some of the things about soil carbon and organic matter, just because I feel the need to. But that'll be about 3 minutes, and then we'll dive right into why you're here. So, I know, some laughter, thanks Debbie. So, organic matter is roughly 5% of your soil. But what's critical to note is that your carbon is half of organic matter. So when you're talking about sequestering carbon in soils, you're talking about building up your organic matter because half that organic matter is carbon. So it's very good to make that connection that as you build up organic matter from 2.4 to 10%, you just build up the carbon in your soil from about 1.2 to 5%. Because half the organic matter is carbon. So traditionally, many of our best agricultural soils had good 6 to 10% organic matter according to the USDA. Today, we're down to 1 to 3. In fact, the California average today, I just heard 2 months ago from the CDFA, was 1% organic matter is the average in the state of California. So remember, half that's carbon. Where'd a lot of carbon go? In the atmosphere, right? So we know this is due to tillage almost primarily and exclusively. Dr. Rehan Lal, globally roughly 2/3 of total soil carbon has already been lost from our planet's cultivated soils. Tillage is one of the major practices that reduces organic matter level in the soil, FAO. Quick little study I'd love to show. You have erosion over here. This is back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. We have no-till field, moldboard plow field in Tennessee. It's a USDA study. And 4,750 pounds of erosion per acre per year in the moldboard plow field. And the no-till field, 6 pounds of erosion per acre. 700 times more erosion in the moldboard plow field than the no-till field. And back in the days, 79 to 82, that was half the national average of the erosion rate. The national average was about 8,500 pounds of soil per acre per year. So that was a good farm back then. And just compare. To give you an idea, that 4,700 pounds per acre is about a 14th of an inch. So it's not really visible, but year after year after year, that's our topsoil going away, that's carbon and organic matter being lost, that's part of what tillage does. Of course, there's all kinds of conservation tillage. There's some great ways that tillage is being brought back into a more beneficial aspect, but I want to keep going through this. So every passive tillage equipment can remove the equivalent of about a 1/4 inch of rainfall from your soil. Tillage, I love this one. Tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. Simply stated, tillage is bad for the soil. USDA. That's the USDA saying that. They know, the scientists know what works and what doesn't. It's a matter of application, finding out how can we continue to produce food on this planet without tillage. And that's been the real brand new struggle in all the food sectors of agriculture, whether it's pasture management and rangeland management, or row crops, or grain crops, and now vegetables as well. How do we begin to reduce tillage to get back to real soil health? Finally, or the top, right, it's like the bottom part here. 1% soil organic matter soil has been tilled, has an average of tens of yards of fungi in it, versus the 6% organic matter soil, untilled, has an average of tens of miles of fungi in it, in a single little teaspoon. So just again, the factor difference, miles of fungi to yards of fungi between soils. So this is why, these are some of the many reasons why organic matter is really important. I'll skip those for now. So, here we go. Managing for soil health can be accomplished by, I usually combine these into 3 different things, but every aspect of management on the farm, I refer back to this set of ideas. And granted, I don't really refer back to them specifically because I have a more intuitive understanding, like many of you do, about how systems work and how the farm works. But these are what are the critical foundations to soil health. Disturb it as little as possible. Grow as many different species of plants as practical. Keep living plants in the soil as often as possible. And keep the soil covered all the time. Pretty straightforward. I often combine these two and just say keep a diversity of living plants in the soil as often as possible. But think through these aspects of what the best soil management practices should be, and think through what tillage does to soil. Tillage is the complete antithesis of all of those, except maybe number 2 because of the diversity. So tillage disturbs it heavily, it removes plants from the soil and leaves it bare and exposed. And that's how we have volatilization of nitrogen and carbon out of the soil, combining with oxygen to form nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, 2 most potent greenhouse gases. So we really need to be thinking about how do we not disturb the soil, how do we not leave it bare, and how do we keep those plants in that soil all the time? Because what are plants? They're the carbon pumps. They take atmospheric carbon and sunlight and make nutrient packets, of which half of that they exude through the roots to feed the soil. And the other half they use to build their own bodies. So starting your no-till fields. This is all new for me presenting on this. This is very interesting for me too. I'm much more used to presenting on the science and the why, because that's really important to me in ecology. But I want to go through, I have a lot of photo slides in here. There's probably 80 or 90 slides in here with pictures. So we're going to do a lot of pictures, not much more of this at all. But I want to give you a beginning, and then we'll end on this slide too as we go through. There's a distinction to make between getting your no-till field up and running and then maintaining it. So starting a field is very different than maintaining a field. And starting it, you only do once, and then you've got it up and running. And usually the first question from people is, well, should I sheet compost or do tillage to get the fields cleared to start? And there are other solutions too, but I think the 2 easiest ways are to till and do a full clean slate. So you have your blank slate to begin with, then you build your raised beds, and then, or your mounded beds, or permanent beds, and then you begin farming it no-till. And the other way is to do sheet composting, which is put down cardboard over everything. So you want to weed whack or mow down your existing cover crop or grass, then put down clean cardboard, and then build your beds on top of the cardboard with pure compost. This is more capital intensive. You need to have lots of clean cardboard and lots of compost to build those beds directly on top of the compost. Versus the tillage way, you say, well, my gosh, but you're tilling. Well, you till once, and honestly, if you do a really good no-till field, by the end of the very first season, your soil will be far better than it ever was before you tilled it. So you can heal all the damage done in that first round of tillage to clear the field. And then you put in those permanent beds, and we have called just the magic wavelength. The wavelength would be the cycle of the beds and pathways. So our beds and pathways, we actually have it's a little ways back. So wavelength is really the space from one path to the next path to the next path. And for us, we made our paths as narrow as we could, and this was based on kind of like the horse's rear end in the railroad tracks. For us, it was the wheelbarrow legs. So the wheelbarrow, we got the really sturdy contractor-grade wheelbarrows that are metal, inexpensive, but sturdy and durable and last a long time. The legs happen to gladly be very narrow. So our pathways are just wide enough for those wheelbarrow legs to sit down just on the shoulders of the beds, but no wider. Because the wider the pathway is, the more space you lose to growing, and the more you have to manage the pathway with either mulch or weeding or something else. So once we figured out the pathway width, which happens to be about 1.5 shovels as we scoop it out, then the beds themselves are roughly about 30 inches wide. And 30 just has been a really good distance because for most people, they can reach across that without straining back muscles. We don't want to have people pulling back muscles or separating discs, etc. So we want to have healthy farm crew. So we like 4'9" from center path to center path to center path as our width. And then scoop those paths 1.5 shovels wide. Laying drip irrigation, we don't do the T-tape. We do a round dripper hose with built-in emitters. Those emitters happen to be spaced about every 12 inches. I can talk about irrigation later. And then bed length is really dependent, but I want to go through a few pictures right now so you can look at this.
So what do you guys think, man? Wasn't that an awesome talk about no-till farming? Doesn't it want to make you guys go out and do no-till farming? I mean, to me, it's just like a no-brainer. Duh! No-till farming is the answer. It increases the soil, increases the organic matter in the soil. It's so easy to do, and basically, for practically, Paul is doing more or less what I'm doing in raised beds, and he just has beds that are in rows, right? This just makes so much sense, and it makes me sad when people still feel they want to till and all this stuff. And I know I'm going to get comments down below that people are going to say no-till is hogwash, but this is how nature works, people. There are no rototillers in nature. Anyways, if you guys want to till, I don't really care what you guys do, but we're going to go ahead and move on with this video. What I'm going to do next is, as I was taking notes in the no-till talk, and I would encourage you to check out my Eco Farm video. It's like an hour and 45 minutes where actually I go over, a lot of the things that I learned there, as well as some of the different, vendors, and just give you a tour of Eco Farm, which is a pretty good video in itself. This one I think is more valuable. I was taking notes the second half, and then I took, just pictures of some of his slides that he was presenting. So I'm just going to, next part of this video, I'm going to go ahead and throw up the slides, and then I'm going to go over the slides and share with you guys some of my comments. So now we're going to go ahead and get into the individual slides. So this is the operating and maintaining a no-till field. So this is once you got everything planted out, once you're ready to harvest, and you have harvested, and then you're ready for the next planting. This is what you do. And actually, this is actually quite similar to what I do in my home raised bed garden, because to me, doing a no-till is pretty much like having a raised bed. So what you would do is, obviously, you would harvest your crops, and then of course next is to clear the bed. You're going to cut all the crops down, pull the weeds, and add on compost. Now, one of the things is he cuts the crops at the baseline and leaves a root zone, all the roots in place, and just plants around them the next time through. This increases, he finds, his organic matter. Next, he'll broad fork, and he says, he rarely does that these days. So in a garden at home like I do, I just don't even do any of that stuff. The next thing he does is lifting the pathways. As he's piling on more compost every year to the raised beds, the pathways get lower and lower. So he basically will just, maybe put down some more mulch or something like that, I believe. And then he applies fertilizers, then compost. So in general, he'll use something like the calcium, I believe he mentioned, a calcium source, and then he'll use maybe the rock dust, and then just the compost, and he just tops off the beds with that. And then he transplants in his baby plants. Most of the time he does it from transplants, and not from seed, except certain crops he does start from seed. And then he waters and then covers in. These next slides are actually really cool that I want to show you, because he actually shows the process and how it took 3 people were able to turn 3 beds in 1 hour. So this is the slide showing that, all the crops were grown, and then basically you could see one of the farm workers harvesting. They basically harvested all the usable crops on here, and then the next thing after they harvested the crops, then they basically just pulled all the plants out. So they basically cut them down at the root zone, left the roots in the ground, and wheelbarrowed off the area to put it in one of several compost piles around the property. They moved the drip lines out of the way, and they're just doing some additional cleaning of the beds. You can see here the beds are getting more cleaned, just made clean and tidy, ready for the next planting. Next, they're actually preparing the beds for the next planting. Once they got the beds prepared for the planting, now they're adding the calcium and any other fertilizers that they add, which actually he doesn't use a lot. The main thing they add is they top it off with compost, and then add very few things actually. So you can see here, this is a little bit of a process to add nutrition. And this is something actually I do after every growing season. I'll take my raised beds that generally have sunk down an inch or 2 depending on the bed, and make a mixture of compost and coconut coir and vermiculite, which I may not need, but I have, so I'm adding it in there. And then also with the rock dust and the other things that I add in, and then I top off my bed. So I'm doing something very similar to this in a home garden approach. After applying the fertilizers, then they basically pile on the compost on top. They're continuing to pile on the compost, and this can take some while. All right, there you guys can see they got all the compost spread out all over the beds. The beds have been fully, you know, prepared for the next round, and you can see the you know, the drip lines are back in place. The next step is they're bringing transplants out from the greenhouse. These guys are probably about 4 weeks old. It depends on the specific crop, and they're just planting it out. Now this takes a little bit of time, but you know, they got 3 workers in there, and you know, with 3 people, it is planted out in no time. So as you guys can see, they're planting 3 rows of the crops, and they have it spaced out so that the drip lines that have emitters spacing every 12 inches, and they're using the drip tubing with built-in emitters every 12 inches, not the P-tape that tends to degrade quickly and needs to be replaced. They're placing that so it's no more than really about 3 inches from each plant, and they're getting all this stuff planted out. Now you guys can see it's fully planted out, and what they're doing now is actually watering it in. So this is what I recommend. You know, after I replant, I water things in, and I might even water, you know, for the next week or 2, depending, because, you know, in transplants, the roots may not be close enough to the drippers if I didn't plant them close enough to the drippers, and the water may not actually capillate over there, depending on how long your watering cycle is, and the ability of your soil to capillate and hold the water. Once they get it all watered in, you can see the workers are quite ecstatic and happy, because now they could move on to another task at the farm. And generally, when I plant out one of my beds in my garden, you know, you know, I could pretty much complete a bed, depending on if the bed's like one of my long beds, 4x16, or a 4-foot, you know, just a circular raised bed. You know, I could do a couple beds a day just by myself, mixing the soil, you know, topping it off and all this stuff. And it's just fun time working in the garden. I mean, it's really fun to be connected back to nature, and I want to encourage you guys to get out. All right, so yeah, all that process of those slides were all taken over 1 hour, is what Paul Kaiser said. So, you know, really, it doesn't take that long to, you know, turn a bed in a no-till farm. Once you have a good crew that are trained well, you know, one of the things he does is actually he pays his farm workers quite well, and they never work more than like, you know, 40 or a few hours, over 40 hours a week. So they're not working overtime, and they really enjoy their jobs because they work year-round, unlike many other farms. So let's move on and go into some of the other slides. The next slide that Paul put up is actually the benefit of using transplants. So, you know, I highly encourage you guys to use the transplants when planting a garden. This is especially important if you guys are a beginner, right? Hopefully if you're farming, you're not really a beginner, and you know what you're doing, and you know how to make good, healthy transplants or plant starts. But a lot of times I find people, when they start their seeds out, they don't really work that well, and they get long and spindly, and they may not be healthy, and then you wonder why your garden didn't do so well. That's because it's very important to get good, healthy transplants in the get-go. And if you don't know how to make them yourself, have somebody else do that for you. You know, like I support a local farmer that grows the majority of my transplants, or, you know, go out and buy them somewhere. So here's some of the benefits of using transplants. Basically, he could save time. You know, because he has transplants ready to plant out after he clears a bed that you just saw the process, he could clear that bed and you have the transplants ready to go in, so there's less bare soil. There's always going to be something growing in the soil. There's literally an hour of time when nothing is growing in the soil, you know, at Paul's farm in many cases. Now there's a few exceptions, but they're actually few and rare. Because if you were to plant seeds, that would take a lot longer for them to actually start growing and germinating and all this stuff. Transplants get a second infusion of nutrients. You know, he's basically, when he transplants, he, you know, adds nutrition to the soil, so the plants get further nutrition because they already are grown in a good mixture. He likes using like the 80% mixture of Happy Frog potting soil and 20% compost to make his transplant seed starting mix that he grows his transplants in for several weeks, about 4 weeks in general. And the cost, he says, to basically make a flat of transplants for him is about $2 a flat. So he said he would much rather have extra transplants, you know, that maybe he doesn't plant sometimes or give them to friends or sell them, than to not have any plants and not be able to put things back in his garden. So transplanting and creating seedlings and plant starts is a constant job there at the Seeing Frog farm. For me personally, since I travel probably a little bit too much, I don't have the time to manage all my plant starts. I tend to be lazy and let nature do all my plant starts for me. So I let seeds drop in many cases. They come up, and when they pop up in the garden and I see there's ones I want, I'll actually transplant them out into pots. They've already been established. I let them grow in pots in a protected environment for a little bit, and then I'll transplant them back out. Or simply I'll just go out and buy, transplants, good healthy transplants. It's important if you're buying them to inspect them and make sure you're getting good healthy ones. And I find, I go to a place that I get, transplants for about, I don't know, $10 to $12 per flat. And I'm willing to pay that, to get healthy plants so I could have a jump on the garden. Another thing he uses about transplants is that he's assured to get 100% crop coverage. If he was to plant seeds, you don't know if some seeds are going to germinate, some seeds are not going to germinate, and you may not get 100% coverage. So I encourage you guys to get 100% coverage in your guys' home gardens as well. I mean, he's growing food for money, and he has to make a living at this. You guys are doing it, for fun and for your life. I mean, food is important. It's the number one most important thing that you guys could be doing to change your life for the positive is grow your own food. So why leave barren soil? Let's get 100% plant coverage and grow things close together. If you're not familiar on how close to plant things, you want to look up square foot gardening, plant spacing, or look up biointensive plant spacing. They're very similar, a little bit different, but those will give you some really good guidelines. If you're growing in a system that has really good organic matter and soil, you could get away with planting things significantly closer than what they tell you on the seed starting pack. Less time in the field equals more crops per year. So because they turn it so fast, he can actually, have multiple plantings. I think he said 7, I don't exactly remember, 7 harvests from one bed from a whole year, whereas most certified organic farmers might get 1 or 2 harvests for the whole year because they leave the land fallow half the time, and the land is exposed, and when it's exposed, you're degrading the soil, so don't leave your land exposed. Less time in the field means less availability to pests. Now, because the transplants were started in a protected, greenhouse nursery area they have, plants are much more susceptible when they're babies and young. That's why we, don't kick our kids out until they're 18. We would never just leave a baby on the street on a corner or something. I guess they did that in the olden days when they didn't want them. But we would never do that these days because a baby cannot fend for itself, and baby plants cannot fend for themselves. But once the plants are, more older, a month old practically, they're a lot more resilient to external stressors. Transplants outcompete weed seeds. So because he's not seeding and because he adds a whole new layer of compost on every time that is weed seed free, he has these established plants, they already established, they grow up quick and they shade out the other weeds that just pretty much don't come up in his garden. So in my technique, occasionally some weed seeds get blown in or some weed seeds are mixed in my compost that didn't get the grade they come up. But I'll tell you that I barely do any weeding inside my beds at all with the methods I use, which is very similar to what Paul's doing there. Less water used to get established. So if you plant from seed, you got to constantly water to keep the seed at a good moisture level, or the water will evaporate off the soil. But because he's done all that, the plant has roots and it could fend for itself. It could find its own water. So you're going to save water. In addition, another point that I want to mention is that with the no-till farming style Paul uses, because he is increasing the soil organic matter, there's significantly, and I want to say that again, significantly more water holding capability of the soil. So, this makes you more resilient to when we get heavy rains and flooding. Recently at Paul's farm, they had, the neighbor was flooded out and they had planted a new planting of kale or something, and the whole crop was lost because it got flooded out. But, the way Paul does it, he was, resilient to the water, because he's built his soil and he's doing things according to nature. I mean, one of the things I respect about Paul is that he has a, not a background in farming, and that's cool if you have a background in farming, but he has a background in like agroforestry and basically restoring habitats and land. So he's taken this approach to farming and really, in my opinion, advanced the whole no-till to like a science, without. So anyways, the most vulnerable stage of plants that he's starting his transplants. They're actually in the protected nursery. And does it seem like a lot of work? And you might say, man, that's a lot of work, John, planting all those transplants out. It's easier to seed. So, you know, he says he knocked out 100 flats, 5,000 plants in 10 hours in the rain in one day. So, I mean, for me, I'd much rather, I mean, I love transplanting my plants, you know, because besides him, he's just transplanting each plant, getting in the ground, covering it so that could go a lot faster. I actually, you know, will add things in the planting hole when I transplant personally. So while Paul does transplant, you know, most crops, there's a few things he does actually direct seed because it just doesn't make sense to transplant them. Things such as carrots, radishes, peas, and beans. And he will direct seed those, and then he'll cover them in burlap. So this helps keep the soil covered, which is one of his main tenets. It also lets, you know, it holds the moisture in there. It also lets, you know, a little bit of light and some heat through. And so he does that in the beginning. And takes it off when the plants start to germinate, probably. And then he occasionally will direct seed things like arugula, cilantro, cut and come again lettuces, and small Asian mustards. And everything else is transplanted. So now he gets into talking about how to grow healthy transplants, and the soil is critical. And I already mentioned the mixture he uses. He uses 80% Happy Frog potting soil and a 20% compost that he makes. And he talked about, you know, the nutrition in there, you know, as the plant's starting to, you know, germinate and come out. It wants to have some nutritious soil that needs to support it. And it's definitely important not to overwater because you could leach the nutrients out of your transplant medium. So it's important not to overwater your transplants. He also talked about the mycorrhizal fungi, which is actually in the Fox Farm soil. I actually add additional mycorrhizal fungi. These guys are so important. You know, I basically add that to the roots on every transplant, you know, that I make in my garden. He also talked about moisture management. He actually said that you don't want too much rain, and actually he did not believe that worm castings were something good to add to transplant medium, which I'll actually have to look into, but hey, if he says that, that's what it is. I think it'd be more beneficial, you know, adding it in at a later point. Benefits of larger size transplants: he has higher survivability and less time in the fields. Can be handled roughly or quickly, especially when you have to plant out 5,000 plants in a day. And the shades the soil. So because the plants are larger, you know, they're starting to get some leaves on them, and they will shade out the soil more than if you just planted from seedlings. He talked about the duration in the nursery. You know, on average, things are 4 weeks, he said, but some things are 3, and some things may be, you know, a little bit longer. He also talked about, you know, that, as I mentioned before, transplant costs him about $2 to produce, including soil, seeds, and labor. So when I need my transplants, I'm going to be like, hey, Paul, could I buy some flats for you from $2? Well, he probably wouldn't sell them for that. So this is a picture actually of his greenhouse area where he makes his transplants. You can see basically he has like a 2x4s and some 4x4 posts to make framing. And what he found to use for the racks is he bought like this, like the hog panel kind of stuff with a grate on there. I'm not exactly sure the dimensions on that. I think it's maybe just a cheap hog panel, because he had used pallets and the nails stick up and it would snag a whole, you know, flat and all these kind of things. But this is what he found works best, and I would probably concur. You know, his nursery area looks great, and yeah, he wants to make sure his plants are nice and established before planting them out in the fields. He talked also about, you know, yellowing of nursery plants, and I hear about this a lot, you know, and basically said if your plants are yellowing, you know, in your nursery or seedlings, it's because you're watering them too much. So, you know, that is a fine art in itself, knowing how much to water your seedlings. You know, people are like, oh, I want to love my plants, I want them to germinate, I want to give them water every day. They don't need water every day, you will drown them. If you drink too much water, you can choke and drown. So, you know, that's something that you just have to learn. You need to check the soil, you know, and check to see, you know, the transplants and how they're looking, and water appropriately. And this will change, so you can't always have a regular schedule, you know, and certain times of the year, maybe when you're starting your transplants and it's not as hot outside, you know, you're not going to have to water as much. But if you're still doing transplants, you know, when it's hotter outside and you're in a greenhouse, you're going to have to water it more often, right? Because especially because there's not a lot of soil in those little pots, it dries out pretty quick there. Next, he went over his spacing for transplants. You know, as I mentioned before, I do the square foot gardening or biointensive spacing. Paul probably uses something very similar, and basically has one system for everything. So basically his drip line, as you saw in the pictures, were 2 lines, emitters with 12-inch spacing. You know, I personally might do it 8 inches, might give you a little bit more flexibility, but basically this is what he does. All transplants on a standardized spacing regime. He has 2 lines, and every 24 inches he plants things like Romanesco cauliflower, summer squash. 2 lines at 18-inch spacing. He has the Brussels sprouts. 3 lines at 18-inch spacing. He has the broccoli and cauliflowers. 3 lines at 12-inch spacing. He does the kale, the chard, the head lettuces. He has 3 lines and 6-inch spacing for the bulb fennel, and 4 lines at 6-inch spacing for the small head lettuce and Asian greens. And other things like tomatoes, winter squash, potatoes, alliums, he had different spacings for. So another thing he talked about when spacing your transplants is he talked about basically maximizing the plants you're spacing in the garden. So even though these are his general spacings, when he plants the new baby plants, you know, he'll interplant other crops with the intended, you know, crop for that field or you know, row. For example, if he's growing the Romanesco cauliflower, he's going to plant lettuce intermixed with them along the middle row to basically increase his harvest from that field, because what's going to happen is the lettuce will grow so fast, and by the time the lettuce is fairly large, the cauliflower leaves are now just starting to shade them out a little bit so that they're going to be tender, delicious, and good to eat, and he'll harvest those guys. And then by the time he harvests them, the cauliflower leaves are grown out and now they're shading where the lettuce was. But previous to that, they were not. So he really likes to interplant things, Romanesco and lettuce. He'll do dill and cabbage. He'll do leeks and lettuce. And yeah, I mean, this talk was so great. Anyways, let's go ahead and continue to the next slide. Next, he talked about compost and fertilizers. This is something critical, you know, to your garden, to his farm, and also, you know, to your garden, in my opinion. Basically, to go over this, I mean, you can see he talked about all these different areas. I took notes on some things, but in general, he talked about, you know, on compost, he's not a big fan of animal compost in general. He said there could be too much salts and pathogens in there. You know, he used to get like almost all plant sourced compost, but just recently started getting some good local compost manures from local horses, maybe primarily due to the Sonoma compost shutdown in his area. So I mean, I was sure to ask him, like, hey, where do you get good compost in your area? And he was getting Sonoma compost, but now since they closed, he's basically making his own and getting more local resources. So he didn't really have any good options for people where to purchase good compost in Sonoma County now, which I was actually looking forward to. So yeah, you could make it on the farm and off the farm. When he first started, he was bringing it mostly in off his farm. Now that he's up in production, you know, he's making more and more on his farm, so he doesn't need it. He talked about nutrient management, calcium, feather meal, and the trace minerals like the rock dust. He talked about compost blankets and managing moisture. The perfect compost building recipe doesn't exist. You know, compost happens, and as long as you're making some compost, he said it was good. And, you know, I would just say that not all composts are created equal. He talked about how much and when. You know, basically adds it after every plant harvest to retop the beds, to give back nutrition, because what he's really doing, he's actually mining minerals. And he's mining those minerals, putting them into plants, he's exporting them off the farm. So now he needs to add things back to the soil to build that back up for the next batch. He also did recommend soil tests, water tests, and even more soil tests. One of the things he really talked about that I want to cover was compost blankets. And there's a company called Compost Tech in Vermont, and that's a compost blanket to regulate the temperature of your compost. Either keep it warmer or, you know, keep it cool in the summer. So this is something that was actually very interesting to me that I'm going to look into, and that was really cool. So now he talked about, making compost, and he said he's a big fan of aerating the compost regularly to make it faster. He also talked about adding oyster shells to compost to take away the ammonia smell if it's starting to smell. Another thing he talked about in this slide is basically is mulching, and basically he likes to use a more of a living mulch, so he plants things so densely so that basically the sun doesn't hit the earth. He did mention rice, straw, or wood chip mulches, and sometimes, because it's important to keep your soil covered at all times, sometimes he's not able to replant a bed right after he harvests, so in that case he'll cover it. He'll cover the bed with a blanket and keep it covered so that it's going to stay ready and be covered until he's ready to plant out. So this happens like this time of year, when he's not quite ready to plant his warm season stuff out, and he just wants to get a jump on that, so he's going to wait, and keep it covered for a little bit, unplanted but covered instead of replanted out. Next, he goes over some of the tools he uses, and this is probably good if you're a farmer. Doesn't really help me out a whole lot, but it's interesting. Broad fork shovels, rigid rakes, wheelbarrows, carts, 5-gallon buckets and yogurt quarts, nursery flats and 6-packs, serrated harvest knives, CoolBot walk-in refrigerator, wash station, packing materials. So I mean, for me personally, I'll have a video soon on some of my favorite tools that I like to use in the garden. But to me, actually, some of the tools that I like the most, actually, bulb planter. So I could just basically take a bulb planter and put that in the ground, pull out a plug, and then I have a little nice spot for my transplant to go in. This makes me much more efficient when planting. And then, of course, nursery flats and 6-packs, definitely handy to have around. And I have a wheelbarrow to mix my compost and all this stuff. Let's go ahead and move on. So now what we're looking at actually is an overview site of the Singing Frog Farm. And this is kind of just the spacing and the site map. So let's see if I remember anything. Basically, the ones with the gray tops are like structures, and then I think all the ones outlined in the brown were planting beds, and then actually the ones with the little blue I think were the like ponds, and then I think the little brown circles are compost piles. So we have those spread out, and I don't really remember much else, but I hope to visit them one day and soon, and make a video there and show it to you guys in person. Should be amazing. So one of the big things that was important to Paul that I really want to stress that I probably need to do more of was increase the ecological biodiversity in crop areas. So he grows hedgerows, and he's really into his hedgerows. I think that was in the last slide. He has so many hedgerows in between several rows of his plants, and this is one of the reasons why no-till farming works. If you just try to do no-till without the hedgerows, you will not be as successful, from what Paul says, and I believe it. The hedgerows do so many different things, because it's an undisturbed soil area. That's where you get some of the beneficial pollinators to nest, and other, create a habitat for creatures, birds and snakes and everything, and they're going to help you take care of your garden, and they're free labor, so you're just going to attract them. So you want to mix berry, flower, and herb crops with vegetable crops. Be sure to add vertical elements to your growing space, from subterranean clovers to fruit trees. Combine perennial food crops with annual food crops, and leave some leafy crops to flower for post-harvest, for the beneficials. So this is the slide where it actually talks about, the hedgerows. Leave areas of the farm undisturbed to provide habitat, restore and enhance existing natural habitat, connect on-farm habitat to nearby natural areas, plant trees and shrubs as hedgerows, windbreaks, borders, filter strips, and wildlife corridors, provide sources of water, shelter, nesting materials, plant clover in roads and paths. Even his roads there at his farm are planted out, which is actually quite cool, because he doesn't want to leave any bare soil, something that most farmers are really good at doing. So this is a really cool cartoon that he really likes, and it's one organic myth: selective pesticide, butterflies and ladybird friendly, kills only ugly bugs. So I mean, everything you spray, even if it's the, you know, organic certified pest control, there are always repercussions to that. You know, in my opinion, there are really no truly selective organic pest controls. Yeah, maybe some won't affect some creatures, but there are always repercussions. You know, what are the repercussions of spraying pest controls, even organic, and then having them drop into your soil, to the microbiome in the soil, right? We just don't really know. So that's why, you know, he doesn't spray anything, which is quite impressive, and he has a system set up to do that. Now, would I necessarily recommend you guys just stop spraying everything in your garden? Well, depending on where you live and how your system's set up and how natural it is and how long you've been doing it, that might be a disaster. So, you know, I kind of, you know, have stages, right, where I escalate things. So like stage number 1 for me, I see an outbreak, I use my fingers to smush them or collect the pests, go out there every day, collect snails, collect slugs, you know, collect cabbage worms off the leaves. You can collect them yourself, so then you don't have to spray anything, right? Another thing you can do that I like to do, I was actually just doing it the other day, is high pressure water blast. So I have a really good video on the bug blaster. Actually, I'll put a link down below this video if I remember. And actually, I high pressure water spray plants off. So I'm just spraying water, right? And even spraying high pressure water on good bugs may not be the best for them. But nonetheless, you know, where I'm spraying, basically there's a white fly or aphid infestation, and this dislodges them and, you know, gets them off my plants, and they may not make it back on. So this is much more friendly than spraying even organic pest controls. So once I spray this, you know, the high pressure water, I'll spray that, and then I'll repeat it, you know, every day or every other day for a couple days, a week, and then I should get the situation under control. And if I'm not able to do this, like I'm traveling, you know, I'll try to do this as much as I can. Then if I have to, you know, I'll try to use the least toxic spray. So I mean, one of the things you could do is like diatomaceous earth. I have a video on that. Try to post that below too. That's another thing I really like to do, because that will actually fall into the ground and actually add to the soil in the end. That basically works by dehydration. And then the other thing that I'll do is the Neem and Dr. Bronner's Southside soap, and I'll put a link down below to that pest control method. And that's like I do only if I have to, right? If I got some major situation that is going to take me out, I just don't spray that haphazardly. I go through the other stages first. So this is where Paul talks about the economics, because people might say, oh, it's, you know, you can't do no-till because it's not profitable. So I mean, he compares average gross revenue per crop acre. So per crop acre, he has several acres under cultivation at his farm. So all California vegetables, $1,900 revenue per crop acre. You know, California organic farms, better at, you know, $3,700. Small diversified direct market vegetable farms, mainly organic, $11,000 revenue per acre. And then, you know, there's just different farms like student farms that basically get free labor, so they're able to, you know, make more revenue. But then if you go to Singing Frog Farms, you know, he makes $100,000 in gross revenue per acre. So clearly, this financially makes sense, and it just makes sense for the environment to basically restore the land, because we are degrading it here on the planet. So I'm really, you know, excited that this can be profitable and at the same time do good for the creatures on the earth, you know, whether they're the bugs, the pollinators, whether they're the, you know, the native species that are getting wiped out because we're bulldozing them, putting in parking lots and things, right? So this is the real, if you want to farm, this is the way I'm going to do it one day when I have acreage, right? It's pretty much the same system I'm using now, but just in a larger fashion, and it can be profitable if that is your goal. You know, my goal is to just grow some really great high quality food for me and my family. So this next slide is called a Venn diagram, and it basically shares relationships. And I mean, that's, if you think about it, that's what farming is, that's what gardening is, that's what life is all about. It's about cultivating relationships with everything. So this Venn diagram shows that, you know, no-till agriculture done in the way that Paul is showing at his farm is, you know, environmental stewardship at its finest. It can, you know, also provide economic prosperity. and it also is socially responsible. The no-till method for environmental is soil organic matter 8 to 11%. Once again, as Paul mentioned earlier, soil organic matter on a standard farm in California, a recent survey, 1%. This is dismal, right? Provides perennial hedgerows, no sprays, ultra low water use, because once again, the no-till, when you increase the organic matter, you significantly increase the soil moisture holding capacity. It's kind of like an earthquake, like on the Richter scale, an earthquake that's like 5 is not like a little bit stronger than a 4. It's significantly stronger than a 4 on the Richter scale. And same thing, as soil organic matter goes up, water retention goes up, and more importantly than just the water retention is the fertility, and also the carbon holding capacity, and also the microbiome, or the beneficial microbes in the soil. I mean, all around, this is just a good thing to do. So yeah, also the native bees and songbirds and other creatures, it enhances them and their lives, because farming is wiping them out. Even organic farming done on mass scale like it's being done now is unsustainable in my opinion. And yes, I buy organic food when I'm not growing my own, and I wish that there are more no-till farms that I could support, because I believe this is one of the answers for the future, how we really need to grow food on a large scale, if you want to grow large scale. Now, of course, I encourage everybody to take responsibility for what they grow and grow part of what they need to grow by themselves, and grow your own food, because that's really, we need to, diversify and not focus on having large farmers. We need to have many small farmers. Also, for socially responsible, this has job security, because he provides jobs year-round. He doesn't have the farming season when he has to let people go during the winter when he's not growing anything, not seasonal. And he feeds the community year-round, unlike other CSA programs in his area that only operate certain times of the year. He's 100% year-round, and fresh crops. Some CSAs provide crops, like potatoes and squashes that they already grew, and then they stored for the winter, and then they just basically doll them out over the winter when they don't have things, or they sell things like sauerkraut that they preserve. But in my opinion, fresh food is always the best food. And also, I mean, this would not be possible if it did not make economic sense. His gross sales, $100,000 gross sales per crop acre per year. Now granted, he did go over his labor costs. His labor costs are 58% of the 100,000. But labor costs, it's not something that's like, oh, it's a bad thing. When you have enough gross sales to cover it, it's a good thing, because now you're creating U.S. jobs, right? You're not underpaying the poor farm workers and treating them bad, and they're having to put on suits, or in some cases no suits, and spraying toxic pesticides. This eliminates all those issues from growing food. This next slide basically, I believe, shows, I don't think I took any notes on this, but basically just shows his microbial communities of the microbes in his soil. Now, this is something that most farmers, unfortunately, do not pay attention to. They get soil tests. Oh, yes, they test, maybe 17 main minerals in the soil, and that's what a farming is all about to most growers, including organic growers, right? But the soil microbes and the soil microbiome in the soil is really where it's at. And these are like the workhorses that break down the organic matter and make it available for the plant to take in the nutrients. And he's basically showing in this how after 5 years it went up significantly. And this is what every farm needs to do, because farms, even organic farms, are degrading the soil microbiome, right? That's why there's low organic matter. If there's not high organic matter, the soil microbiome cannot thrive in there. So this is why I encourage you guys to do no-till methods, and sell that rotor-till if you have one, right? I have a video on how to rotor-till, or aerate your soil if you want to, and it's actually by using microbes and letting them do all the aeration and getting earthworms. There's natural ways to do these things, and everybody's been taught wrong for many years, and it's just because it's been taught wrong all these years doesn't make it right. And people need to wake up to the fact that there are ways to successfully do no-till, and more farms should get on this as soon as possible. So once again, Paul went over some of the tenets of no-till and how to manage soil for health. And these are the things he lives by, and he tries to create systems and steps and procedures at his farm to accomplish these. So, and I want to encourage you guys to do this in your personal gardens as well. And if you have a farm, please do this also. It does work. You know, there are many steps to it, and I hope that one day Paul writes a book. So anyways, to recap, one of the most important slides in this whole presentation. Number one, disturbing the soil as little as possible. This is very important. Growing as many different species of plants as practical. Number three, keep living plants in the soil as often as possible. And number four, keep the soil covered all the time. And this is a quote from the USDA. This is coming from the USDA. At the same time, most farmers still do not do this, although this is, you know, the USDA is saying this. I think the last thing that he really touched on that he was really passionate about was overhead irrigation. In 1980, overhead irrigation was outlawed in Israel. Like, what was that? 35 years ago, they outlawed it in Israel. And actually, there's a lot of drip emitter and components coming in from Israel. That's because they've been working on this technology, whereas, you know, people still do overhead watering here in the States, and I think that is an abomination, and it should be stopped. The problem they need to do that is because, once again, their soil is poor. It has low organic matter. It does not hold the water well, so they got to just keep watering, and it keeps sucking it up, and they got to keep watering. So this causes more water loss, right? But doing it the right way by increasing your soil organic matter and using the drip system like Paul does, he doesn't have to water that much. You know, I took down how much he waters. Let me see if I could find it in my notes. But he basically like waters very, very, very infrequently. I was actually impressed on how few times a week he waters. And I don't remember where he put it. I'm not going to quote incorrect information. I tried to have as much accurate information in this, but I might got some stuff wrong. So Paul, if you're watching this, I'm sorry if I got anything wrong. But hopefully overall I pretty much got your message out there. And yeah, I hope to once again visit Paul really soon and make a video at his place really highlighting of what he's doing, because this is seriously really important. So what do you guys think of that entire presentation? Did you guys like this? If you guys like this, hey, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know when I'm out in California next. I'm going to try to, hook up with Paul Kaiser, go to his farm so I could show this to you guys personally and see it for myself, because I've been hearing Paul speak for a couple years now, and every time he inspires me. I mean, he's not like a speaker or anything, and this is the first time he's like teaching this stuff, because he normally just does it. He doesn't teach it. But man, this stuff inspires me, and I wish that there's more farmers like Paul out there, right? And I want to encourage you guys to be more like Paul and let him be your model, because it can be profitable. You can raise healthy food, and this is probably one of the best ways to do it. But it's not just about not tilling. There's more things that also need to be incorporated, like, a native habitat and having native species, and, constantly staying on top of the weeds and making paths and mulching and adding copious amounts of compost, and he adds rock dust too. So it's a whole entire system, and you can't just be like, okay, I'm not tilling, everything's gonna be fine. No, there are other parts of the puzzle that you need to, get straight so that it will work out and be successful. And basically, Paul's figured all this stuff out for you. So I hope that actually Paul writes a book on this stuff and, is able to share this with others on how he does it, so that he can be the model, for other organic farms to follow along, and even big agribusinesses to follow along with no-till, because I truly believe that this is the future of, not only farming, and even more important than just farming, but regenerative farming that's actually restoring the land instead of strip mining it away like conventional and even many organic farming practices do. So once again, if you like this episode, hey, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know. If I get a lot of thumbs up, man, I'm going to go out and visit Paul, make some time to do that, and visit his farm and interview him one-on-one. Also, please put below any questions that you'd like me to ask Paul in the comments. I'll be sure to ask him. And also be sure to subscribe to my episodes if you guys like this video. This is the kind of episodes and knowledge that I like to share, stuff that you will not hear on any other YouTube channel. All aspects of home gardening, commercial farming, in an ecological way, products, and I don't really discriminate. I just try to put anything out there that could help you guys, even if it just helps one of you guys. I've met my mission to, help make the world, the planet, and your guys' lives a better place. Also, be sure to check my past episodes. I have over 1,100 episodes now, teach you guys all aspects of how to grow food at home. I visit farms and, teach you guys how to do things here in my backyard and my front yard. And I just have a fun time in doing that, and I know that you will, gain a wealth of knowledge through my experiences and what I'm sharing on this YouTube channel. So with that, the sun's going down and I gotta make some dinner. So once again, my name is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. We'll see you next time, and remember, until then, keep on growing. All right, this is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. Today, another exciting episode for you. Where I'm at today is Pacific Grove, California. It's near Monterey, and the reason why I'm here today is for a 4-day event starting